Go on, leave. You won't last a week without me, Emma.
He said with that cold smirk he always wore when he wanted to see me crumble. My rich husband made it sound like a dare. He honestly believed I would not last even a single week without him. So, I did exactly what he never expected. I calmly placed my keys on the marble counter inside the house he had proudly paid for, turned around, and left without looking back. The very next morning, his boss and his father were both calling like madmen, their numbers flashing one after another. Now the phone at the bank would not stop ringing either. But before we continue, tell us what city you're from. It's important for us to know where our stories reach. What exactly did you say to her this time? Someone had shouted at him last night. You would not last a week without me, Emma. Ryan Thorne, my husband, set his crystal tumbler down with a sharp click, the golden whiskey inside catching the glow of the chandelier above us. Without my money, my name, my influence, my protection, you would go back to being no one. Just another pretty face pouring coffee or answering phones. He adjusted his Hermes tie with perfect precision, waiting for me to fall into my usual role, begging, crying, promising I would never leave. But not that night. I opened my Chanel bag, pulled out the keys, and laid them in a neat line on the counter, house key, car key. Each one made a crisp sound against the granite. You are right, I said quietly. Let's find out. I watched the color drain from his face as I turned toward the door, leaving behind every single thing he had ever bought me. That was only 3 hours ago, but it already felt like another lifetime. Now I was sitting in the lobby of the Langham Hotel, its chandelier's glow reflecting on the polished floors, while I watched the live security feed on my phone. Yes, I still had full access to the cameras in our penthouse, one of many things Ryan never realized I understood. On the screen, he was pacing back and forth in the kitchen, picking up the keys, putting them down, calling someone, probably Patrick, maybe even his father, Edward Thorne. But I knew he would never call the police. What could he possibly tell them? My wife left her keys and walked out. The concierge approached me with a soft, polite smile. Miss Lawson, your suite is ready. Hearing my maiden name felt strange when I said it earlier that morning to make the reservation, but it also felt good. It was mine, the one thing Ryan could never buy, sell, or own. I paid for everything myself, with my own money. 6 figures, money I had earned from what Ryan always called my cute little hobby of day trading. He used to laugh about it at parties, telling people that I played with stocks the same way other wives played tennis. No one ever guessed that I had turned his initial $10,000 allowance into enough to support myself for years. The suite was smaller than our penthouse, but it felt enormous, filled with air, space, and freedom. I placed my single suitcase by the bed. It was the one I had been secretly keeping at the gym for months, slowly adding a few essentials each time I went. Ryan tracked every credit card purchase, but he never questioned my regular workouts. Trophy wives were supposed to stay in shape, it was part of the image. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. 17 missed calls already. I deleted his contact, watching his name vanish until his number was nothing more than a row of anonymous digits. When I tried to silence the phone, the first voicemail played by accident. Emma, this is ridiculous. Come home. We can talk about whatever upset you. His voice had that calm, practiced tone he used when managing an unpredictable investment, meant to sound reasonable, but never sincere. By the 5th message, that calm had cracked. You cannot just walk out. Half of everything is in both our names. You need my signature, too. I deleted every message. That morning felt like another world. I had woken at 6, like always, alone in our California king bed because Ryan had fallen asleep in his study again, surrounded by screens showing late-night trading in Tokyo. The coffee maker was already set to brew on schedule. Despite what he told his friends, I had learned to use every single appliance in that kitchen. At a dinner party last month, he joked that I could not even use a toaster. Everyone laughed, including me, the obedient wife who played her role well. I had stood by our floor-to-ceiling windows, 23 floors above the city, watching the first light spill over the skyline. The silk robe he gave me for Christmas itched against my skin. Designer label, wrong size, chosen by his assistant, who assumed every wife wore a size 2. That morning was our wedding anniversary, for years, but he had not mentioned it once all week. I had stopped expecting him to remember after the second year. The invitation to a charity luncheon still sat on the marble counter. Another performance, another day of smiling while the wives compared vacation homes. Helen Brennan, with her fixed smile, would lean over and ask, "Still playing with your little stock app, dear?" She never knew that I had made more this quarter than her husband's entire dental practice. That was the moment I decided to organize Ryan's study. I had planned to find the insurance documents. Instead, I found something else entirely. Ryan was always meticulous about his space. Every object was in its exact place. His voice recorder, a sleek silver device he used for notes, fell when I reached for a folder. It hit the marble floor and started playing automatically. His voice filled the room mid-sentence. "She asked to see our investment statements yesterday." Then laughter. I told her they were too complicated. Too many numbers. She actually believed me. Patrick, I could probably get her to sign over her kidneys, and she would just ask what pen to use. My hands trembled as I picked it up and saw the date. Last Tuesday, the day I had brought him lunch at the office to surprise him with his favorite sushi. He had introduced me to his new analyst as the beautiful Mrs. Thorne. Now I understood the smirk on the analyst's face. The recording continued. "That is why this type is perfect," Ryan said. "Pretty enough for photos, naive enough to control, and grateful enough to stay quiet. My father taught me well, marry beauty, rent intelligence." I placed the recorder back exactly how I had found it, aligning it perfectly on the desk. Then I saw another folder labeled Prenuptial Amendments. Inside were documents dated the previous month, new clauses about abandonment, forfeiture of assets if I ever left without just cause. Already notarized, already bearing my forged signature. Standing there in his pristine office, surrounded by proof of his success and my irrelevance, something inside me hardened. He was not just cruel. He was deliberate, calculated. I was an investment, and he had already begun planning my depreciation. From the window of my suite at the Langham, I could see the lights of our penthouse still burning. I imagined Ryan tearing through his office, searching for what I might have taken. He would find nothing. I had only taken photos and copied files onto encrypted drives he would never discover. The real revenge would come later, legally, through the half of everything he had placed in my name for tax purposes. The phone rang again, and this time the screen showed Edward Thorne, Ryan's father. I let it ring. I remembered how he had once introduced me at a party, Ryan's wife. Pretty thing, isn't she? As if I were jewelry to be admired. Then a text arrived, from Ruth Benson, the family's longtime secretary who had poured tea at every event. "Heard you left. Room 1247. When you're ready to talk, I've got 40 years of information you'll want." For the first time in months, I smiled. Ryan said I would not last a week without him. What he never asked was what I had been doing all those hours he left me alone. He never imagined his perfect little trophy might have been taking notes all along. 7 days, that was all I needed to prove him wrong. After that, I would spend the rest of my life proving myself right. Those keys I left on the counter were not a surrender, they were my declaration of war. And unlike Ryan, I had already read every term and condition. The confirmation email sat on my phone, right next to the 17 legal documents that my lawyer had prepared for the real reason behind tonight's dinner. The dress I had chosen cost $8,000, more than what most people earned in a month, charged to a credit card that Ryan had not yet remembered to freeze. It was deep blue, his favorite color on me, though he had not said a single word about my appearance in 6 months. I stood before the mirror in the boutique, studying my reflection. I looked every inch the perfect wife he had crafted for display, polished, elegant, and expensive. Only the flash drive hidden inside my small clutch hinted at the truth, 40 gigabytes of evidence that could destroy his entire world. My phone buzzed just as I was leaving the salon. A new message from Ryan appeared. Slight change. Patrick and Olivia joining us. Need to discuss Singapore deal. Same time, of course. Our anniversary had officially turned into another business meeting. Sitting in the back of the cab, I watched Chicago blur past the window and typed my reply. Perfect. He would not notice the sharpness in that single word, nor realize it was the first time I had not added a heart emoji or a quick, love you, at the end. 20 minutes later, another text arrived. Actually, Dad insists we come to the estate. He's having something catered. 8 p.m. The driver was already heading toward downtown. I told him to change course and gave him Edward Thorne's address in the Lake Forest suburbs. The irony wasn't lost on me, wearing a dress worth a small fortune to have dinner at the home of a man who had never bothered to learn my last name before it became Thorne. Edward's estate stretched across 12 acres of manicured lawns, the kind that screamed money and control. The circular driveway was already crowded with cars. I recognized Patrick's Bentley, a few luxury sedans belonging to other investors, and Graham Chen's new Tesla. This was not a dinner. It was an ambush dressed up as civility. The door opened to reveal Patricia, Edward's third wife, only 28 and already wearing the same tired expression I often saw in the mirror. "Emma, you look stunning," she said softly, though her eyes were filled with worry. "Why did you come?" was what they truly asked. The foyer opened into the main sitting room, where Ryan stood holding court, a tumbler of whiskey in hand, his cheeks flushed with alcohol. He looked at me briefly, taking in the dress, the hair, the effort, and then turned back to his conversation without acknowledgement. Patrick raised a hand in greeting, while Olivia sat off to the side, nursing her martini like someone wishing she were anywhere else. "The lovely Emma," Edward boomed, stepping out from his study. He kissed my cheek, reeking of cigars and bourbon. "Though I hear you're not being so lovely lately. This separation nonsense, it's bad for business, you understand?" Ruth entered quietly with a tray of champagne flutes. Our eyes met for half a second, and I could tell immediately that she knew what this dinner was really about. As she handed me a glass, her fingers brushed against mine. "Some anniversaries," she whispered so quietly that no one else could hear, "are meant for endings, not beginnings." The dining room table was set for 12. I recognized nearly every face, business partners, their wives, even Ryan's attorney, though that detail clicked only later. The entire evening had been orchestrated to corner me, to make me submit, to bring the trophy wife back in line. I sat in my assigned seat between Patrick and Graham's wife, directly facing a large portrait of Edward's father, the original Thorne who had built his empire on insider trading and strategic marriages. Dinner arrived in perfect courses, served with polished efficiency. Somewhere between the soup and the fish, Ryan began his favorite act. "Funny story about how Emma and I met," he announced to the room, though no one had asked. The room turned toward him with polite attention. She was at the Milken conference, completely lost. Wandered into a derivatives panel thinking it was about art. She actually thought hedge funds were about landscaping, garden hedges. The laughter that followed was too quick, too rehearsed. The entire story was a lie. I had been at that conference to present my graduate thesis on market manipulation in emerging economies. But the truth didn't fit the image he wanted to project, that of a brilliant man who had rescued a beautiful fool. "Thank God for lost puppies," Patrick added, raising his glass. "They make the best pets." Olivia's hand found mine under the table, a gesture of comfort that felt more like pity. I squeezed her hand once before excusing myself. "Powder room," I murmured, even though everyone knew women did not really powder anything anymore. As I passed Edward's office, I noticed the door was slightly open, a faint glow from the computer screen spilling across the carpet. I slipped inside, memorizing every detail: the layout of the desk, the wall safe hidden behind a cheap Monet reproduction, the filing cabinet marked private. His password was scribbled on a sticky note stuck to the monitor: Richard 3, 1936. His birth year and his favorite Shakespeare character. Men like him always thought they were clever. Through the window, I could see the dinner table. The laughter, the raised glasses, the performance. Ryan was now standing, gesturing dramatically with his wine glass, playing the perfect husband while his real wife stood in the shadows gathering evidence. When I returned, the conversation had shifted to business: Singapore expansion, leverage ratios, risk assessments. The wives sat silent, ornamental, while the men discussed millions like it was monopoly money. Then Patrick, drunk enough to forget manners, grinned and said, "You know what Ryan is? He's an empire builder. And Emma here, she's the trophy case. Beautiful, elegant, but only for display." The laughter that followed cut through me like a blade. They all knew the cruelty in that joke, yet they laughed anyway. Ryan raised his glass, smirking. "Best investment I ever made. Great tax benefits, minimal maintenance, and she appreciates in value at all the right events." Ruth was clearing plates now, her movements calm and deliberate. Our eyes met across the table, and in her gaze I saw 40 years of quiet fury, 40 years of watching women like me be diminished, dismissed, and replaced. Her slight nod said everything. She had heard it all, recorded it all, and she was ready when I was. Something inside me changed then, not breaking, but crystallizing, sharp and certain like the diamond on my finger that suddenly felt like a chain. The stone caught the light as I walked out of the Thorne estate that night, each facet flashing like a promise of revenge. In the car, I pulled a cheap flip phone from beneath the seat, bought with cash at a corner store where no one asked questions. I typed out a short message to the only contact saved in it: Tuesday, 2 p.m., Golden Lotus, Chinatown. Ruth's reply came within minutes. "I'll bring tea." 3 days of waiting felt like 3 years. I stayed at the Langham, kept my routine, traded small amounts to stay focused. Ryan had stopped calling. His lawyer was handling everything now, sending formal letters about reconciliation in the interest of financial stability. Each one went straight into the shredder before I forwarded copies to Lisa Chin, my new attorney. Her office was 2 hours away in Wisconsin, far from Ryan's influence. Tuesday arrived gray and humid. The Golden Lotus sat squeezed between a funeral home and a store selling knockoff handbags, its windows clouded by decades of steam from bamboo baskets. No one from Ryan's world would ever step foot there, which made it perfect. Ruth was already waiting in the back corner, wearing a cardigan despite the heat. She looked like someone's grandmother lost on her way to church, but her eyes, those eyes, held 40 years of carefully contained rage. "Mrs. Thorne," she began, but I stopped her. "Lawson," I corrected. "I'm using my maiden name now." She smiled and pushed a tin of butter cookies across the table. The box was old-fashioned, painted with flowers, the kind you'd expect to hold sewing supplies. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a lipstick tube. "Twist the bottom 3 times, then pull," she said. The lipstick was actually a flash drive, 16 gigabytes of what Ruth called insurance. "I started collecting in 1982, she said quietly, her voice nearly drowned out by the restaurant's clatter. "Edward's first wife, Grace, noticed something wrong in the books. She asked me to watch, to listen. Then she had her accident." Ruth lifted her hand and made air quotes around the word accident. "Single car, perfect weather, failed brakes. After that," she told me, "she began keeping everything. Every memo, every transcript of calls she could access, every mistress paid off with company funds, every SEC filing that didn't match the internal reports. The waiter came by with a pot of tea, and we both fell silent until he left. Ruth poured with her usual precision, though her hands trembled slightly when she spoke the name Grace. The second wife, Victoria, lasted a little longer, she went on. A smart woman, MBA from Wharton. She started asking the right questions during year 4. Edward had her committed for exhaustion. She signed her divorce papers from a psychiatric clinic, giving up all her claims just to get released. My tea had gone cold by then as Ruth described 2 decades of crimes, every single one carefully documented on that small flash drive. But she saved the worst revelation for last. Your husband isn't just complicit, she said quietly. He's been grooming Patrick's wife, Olivia. There's a paper trail, flowers billed to shell companies, hotel stays that match his so-called client meetings. He plans to leave you, Emma. But first, he needs to ruin you. That dinner, the performance, everyone there, they were witnesses. They'll claim you were unstable, that you had a breakdown when you walked out. The waiter brought a basket of dumplings, but neither of us touched it. My thoughts were stuck on Olivia's hand at dinner, the way she had squeezed mine. Was her sympathy real, or just another move in their game? That night, I sat in my hotel suite with my laptop open and the flash drive plugged in, scrolling through Ruth's evidence. It was overwhelming, 40 years condensed into folders organized by year, by crime, by victim. But it wasn't enough. I needed Ryan's own records to verify every piece. Lisa Chen answered my call on the second ring, even though it was nearly midnight. I need to start a company, I said. What kind? Something that sounds like nothing. Something that could mean anything. When? Tomorrow. That's a rush job. It'll be expensive. I'll pay triple. 2 hours north on the interstate, past the manicured neighborhoods where Ryan's colleagues lived in their marble fortresses, Lisa's office sat above a dentist and a tax preparer. No marble, no abstract art, just framed diplomas and a tired coffee maker that had seen better days. She had already drafted the paperwork. Silverhawk Holdings LLC, she explained, incorporated in Delaware, registered in Wisconsin, with a business address that leads to a P.O. box that leads to another LLC that leads nowhere. The structure is perfectly legal, she said, sliding the documents toward me, but complicated enough that tracing it would take months of forensic accounting. By then, whatever you're planning will be finished. How do you know I'm planning something? Lisa leaned back in her chair, studying me. Because women who pay triple for a rushed incorporation don't do it for fun. They do it for survival. A week later, Ryan flew to Singapore. He claimed it was for 5 days of meetings about expansion into Asian markets, but thanks to Ruth's intel, I knew he was actually setting up hidden accounts I would never be able to touch. When I told our housekeeper, Clara, to take the week off, with pay, she looked relieved. Spring cleaning, I told her. I need to do it myself. Alone in the penthouse, I became someone else, not the trophy wife, not the ornament, but an investigator uncovering the evidence of my own destruction. His computer password was embarrassingly sentimental, our wedding date, as if that meant anything to him beyond a tax benefit. Once inside, the files were like a confession. Folder after folder, trades timestamped to the minute, all showing the same pattern. Edward would have lunch with certain executives, and within hours, Ryan would make trades in those companies. The correlation was so blatant that once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. In the locked drawer, the one he thought I didn't know about, was something even worse. Not just details about Olivia, but about me. Emails to Patrick discussing my emotional instability, suggestions that I needed psychiatric help, plans to have me evaluated by the same doctor who had testified in Victoria's commitment. My hands didn't shake as I photographed every page and uploaded each file to Silverhawk Holdings' encrypted cloud. Every document went back exactly as I had found it, positioned to the millimeter. Ryan would return to an office that looked untouched, never realizing that I held the proof that could destroy him. In his personal safe, combination hidden in a book about Warren Buffett, of all things, I found a single folder labeled Exit Strategy. It wasn't about business. It was about me. A timeline, outlining when to file for divorce, how to claim abandonment, which assets to hide first. My elimination planned like a merger, complete with profit projections. I photographed it all, then sat back in his leather chair, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ruth was likely compiling her own notes, Lisa was preparing the next corporate layers, and Ryan was asleep halfway across the world, dreaming of empires built on the broken trust of women who had believed him. He was wrong about one thing, though. I wasn't just another prize in his collection. I was the one holding the hammer. And in that moment, the hammer in my hand felt heavier than his entire mahogany desk. I set the metaphorical weapon down and rose from the chair. In the dark reflection of his monitor, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me, someone sharper, colder, more determined than the girl who had walked down the aisle 4 years earlier. The next morning, I went back to my usual routine at the Lexington Club gym. The pool had become my sanctuary, 50 laps where the world disappeared in rhythm and chlorine. I was just pulling myself out of the water when Olivia appeared. Her pristine workout clothes clashed with her exhausted face, dark circles peeking from beneath makeup. "Patrick knows," she said flatly, glancing around the empty pool deck. "About Ryan's messages to me. He hired a private investigator, cloned our phones." Water dripped from my hair onto the marble tiles. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because whatever you're planning, and don't insult me by denying it, these men don't just get angry when they're cornered. They get even." She lowered her sunglasses, revealing a bruise along her jaw, carefully hidden but visible up close. "Patrick's already moving assets offshore. Edward's been calling judges he plays golf with regularly. They know something's coming." Before I could answer, she turned and walked away, her heels echoing against the tile. I sat there for a long time, chlorine stinging my eyes, wondering whether she was warning me or testing me. With people like them, kindness and cruelty always wore the same face. That evening, Ryan returned home carrying lilies, my least favorite flowers. I had mentioned that once, 3 years ago. Since then, he had always bought roses for special occasions, when he remembered them at all. The lilies meant something. They meant he was paying attention now. "Thought we could have dinner together," he said, setting the bouquet on the counter where my keys had once been. "Like we used to." We hadn't eaten together without company in 6 months. I watched him pour wine, the good Bordeaux he usually saved for clients, and arrange a plate of cheese with unusual care. His hands, normally steady when signing million-dollar deals, trembled slightly. "I've been thinking," he began, sitting across from me at the 12-seat table that had never hosted a family meal. "We should take a trip. Just us. Maybe that place in Montana, no cell service, no distractions. Remember how you loved the mountains?" I remembered mentioning that once, on our honeymoon, while he spent the entire trip on conference calls. The fact that he remembered now felt like a trap disguised as tenderness. When I asked him when, slicing a piece of manchego with deliberate care, he said, "Next week, or sooner. Tomorrow even." His eagerness betrayed him. "You seem stressed, Emma. Living in hotels, this separation, it's not good for you." He slid a folder across the table. "New insurance paperwork," he explained smoothly. "Better coverage for both of us." His eyes followed my hand as I reached for the pen, searching for the smallest hesitation, any flicker of doubt. Beneath the table, my phone quietly recorded every page, Lisa Chen's app running silently, saving each image to Silverhawk Holdings' encrypted cloud. "You trust me, don't you?" he asked, voice light but dangerous, the question hanging between us like a chandelier about to fall. "Completely," I lied, signing my name with the same hand that had documented his plans to destroy me. 3 days later, my mother arrived from Ohio, her visit arranged by Ryan himself, who personally picked her up from O'Hare, something he had never done before. He carried her bags, complimented her new haircut, asked about her garden with the perfect polish of a man rehearsing a role. "Oh, honey," she whispered, pulling me aside in the kitchen while he mixed her a gin and tonic with the exact ratio she liked. "You didn't tell me things had gotten better." He seemed so devoted. The words I wanted to say stayed behind my teeth. "He's performing, Mom. This is a show where you're the audience and I'm the prop. And somewhere there's a finale where I don't survive." Instead, I smiled. He's full of surprises. That week turned into a masterclass in Ryan's charm. Broadway shows he once called a waste of time. Lavish dinners at restaurants he supposedly booked months in advance, though I knew his assistant scrambled to arrange them that same morning. A surprise spa day for Mom and me while he handled business. She glowed under the attention, even teared up when he toasted her at dinner, calling her the woman who raised such an incredible daughter. I watched him from across the table, performing the role of perfect son-in-law, and realized with chilling clarity that I had never seen him try before. This was him at full power, the charisma that built his empire, now directed at convincing my mother that her daughter was safe. On the last night of her visit, she sat on the edge of my bed in the guest room, holding my hands. "Honey, you've lost weight. And your smile, it's different. Practiced." Her fingers brushed my cheekbones, sharper now from months of stress and skipped meals. "Are you happy?" Behind her, through the open door, I could see Ryan's shadow in the hallway, listening. "I'm exactly where I planned to be," I said loud enough for him to hear, vague enough to mean anything. After Mom left, Ruth texted me to meet somewhere new, the Chicago Public Library reading room, where she volunteered teaching literacy to immigrants. The irony wasn't lost on me, a woman teaching others to read, surrounded by the city's most powerful men who never bothered to read the human cost of their contracts. She spread newspaper clippings across the worn wooden table like tarot cards revealing a prophecy. Grace Thorne, 1994, drove her Mercedes off a bridge. Perfect weather. No skid marks. Victoria Thorne, 2003, committed for exhaustion, signed her divorce papers while sedated, vanished afterward. Lauren Thorne, 2015, accused of embezzlement she didn't commit, declared bankrupt. Last known address, a shelter in Detroit. Then she placed 4 photographs in a row: Grace, Victoria, Lauren, and me. All blonde. All between 5'4" and 5'6". All with the same delicate bone structure that photographed well at charity galas. "Edward picks them," Ruth said quietly, glancing around the room, mindful of the students nearby. "Like casting calls. Young, beautiful, from middle-class families easily impressed by wealth. Smart enough to be interesting, but not smart enough to be dangerous. He marries them to Ryan, uses them for appearances, then discards them in year 4 when they start asking questions." "Why year 4? I asked. "Long enough to establish a pattern of instability. Short enough to avoid real emotional ties in their social circle. By year 5, they're gone, or broken." She took my hand, her skin fragile but her grip steady. "You're at 4 years and 3 months. Whatever you're planning, Emma, do it now." Grace waited too long. Victoria fought too openly. Lauren trusted the wrong people. I stared at the women who had carried my name before me, their faces blurring into one warning. "What about you?" I asked. "Why did you stay?" Ruth was quiet for a moment, arranging the clippings with librarian precision. "I was Edward's first secretary's daughter. When my mother died, he offered me the job, said it was kindness. I was 19. Grateful. Stupid. By the time I realized what I was documenting, I was trapped too. Different kind of cage, but still a cage. Now I'm 62, invisible, and very, very patient. As the library announced closing time, she handed me one last photo. A young blonde woman, maybe 22. "Who's this?" "Madison Reed," Ruth said. "Edward had lunch with her father last week. She just graduated from Penn, engagement announcement expected within 6 months." Her eyes burned with 40 years of fury compressed into focus. "She's the next you, unless we stop them." Madison's picture felt hot in my pocket as I left the library. 22 years old, her entire life ahead of her, walking toward the same trap that had caught 4 women before her. I tucked her photo into my wallet behind my old student ID, the one from before I became Mrs. Thorne, when I still had my own name and my own dreams. The next morning, I initiated the first transfer, $8,000 from our joint checking account. Just enough to look like a shopping spree, not enough to alert him. The teller didn't blink. Mrs. Thorne buying something expensive was routine. I converted the money to cash at 3 different banks, then deposited it into Silverhawk Holdings account in Wisconsin. Lisa had taught me how to create a convincing paper trail, disguised as payments for interior design consulting. "The IRS loves documentation," she had said, "even if it's fiction, as long as it's properly filed fiction." That evening, Ryan came home at 9 instead of 7. His tie was loosened, jacket gone, scotch heavy on his breath from whichever bar he had stopped at between the office and home. I was in the kitchen making tea when he stumbled slightly in the doorway. "Lost the Morrison account today," he muttered, pouring 3 fingers of Macallan, closer to 4. $40 million in assets gone. They said there were compliance issues. Can you believe that? Compliance issues, at my firm. I kept my face neutral, though I knew Ruth had sent anonymous documents to Morrison's compliance officer 2 weeks earlier. "That's unfortunate," I said calmly, watching him drain half the glass in one swallow. "Patrick thinks someone's been talking to our clients," he said, pouring another drink, his hands shaking slightly. "There are rumors about an SEC investigation." Ridiculous. The next day, I moved $12,000. The day after, 15. Spa treatments, I told the one teller who asked. My husband wanted me to pamper myself. She smiled knowingly, probably thinking of her own inattentive spouse. Ryan's drinking kept increasing in perfect rhythm with his losses. Every night brought a new crisis, another client withdrawing funds, another partner asking questions, another rumor about federal involvement. He paced his office for hours, speakerphone blaring, signing whatever I put in front of him, power of attorney changes, trust amendments, insurance updates, without reading. His signature grew sloppier by the day. Thursday morning, Lisa called from a number I didn't recognize. "Can you meet me today? It's urgent." I found her at a rest stop on the interstate, sitting in her sensible Honda, her posture tight with tension. "The FBI contacted me," she said immediately. "They know I represent you. They want to talk." My chest tightened. "How?" "Edward Thorne has been under investigation for 18 months. A former employee filed a whistleblower complaint. They've been building a case, but they need someone on the inside to confirm it." Lisa continued, "A former employee named Dennis Chin filed a whistleblower complaint. They've been building a case, but they need someone on the inside to confirm it." She handed me a business card. "Agent Sarah Coleman. She specifically asked for you. Did you tell them anything?" I asked. "Attorney-client privilege," Lisa said firmly, then leaned forward. "But, Emma, if you're going to act, it has to be now. Once the FBI makes this public, all assets will be frozen. Anything you haven't already moved will be locked up in litigation for years." That night, I watched Ryan pour his 6th drink before dinner. His phone rang non-stop: Patrick, Edward, lawyers, crisis managers. Each call made him drink more, sign more papers, bark more orders. He suspected everyone except for the wife quietly refilling his glass. "Maybe you should eat something," I said gently, pretending concern while calculating how long his liver could handle this routine. "Not hungry," he muttered, eyes red and unfocused. "You've been different lately." "Therapy," I lied smoothly. "I'm learning to accept what I can't change." Saturday brought the monthly women's auxiliary meeting at the Hudson Valley Country Club. I dreaded it every month, but this time I was charged with a new kind of energy, a countdown in my head to the day I could finally stop pretending. I knew Helen Brennan would be there, queen of the smug social circle that had spent 4 years turning me into a punchline. "Emma, darling," she began the moment I entered, "still playing with your little investment apps? So adorable when wives have hobbies, like children with toy kitchens." The room burst into polite laughter. Ruth stood in the corner, silent as always, pouring tea like part of the wallpaper. Our eyes met briefly. I turned to Helen, my voice calm but loud enough to cut through the chatter. "Actually, Helen, my portfolio is up 340% this year. How's yours doing?" The laughter stopped. Helen blinked, stunned. "I'm sorry, what?" 340%, I repeated. "Would you like to see the statements? I made a killing shorting your husband's pharmaceutical stock last month when their patent was rejected. You knew about that, right?" Helen's face turned white. The other wives leaned in, suddenly seeing me not as a trophy but as a threat. I stirred sugar into my tea with deliberate calm. Some of us prefer real kitchens to toy ones, and real portfolios to pretend ones. Across the room, Ruth's mouth twitched into the faintest smile as she refilled my cup. The rest of the meeting passed in awkward silence. The usual gossip died, only cautious glances remained. By nightfall, Ryan would hear what had happened. By morning, Edward would know his daughter-in-law had teeth. I no longer cared. The clock was ticking, and I was done being underestimated. The explosion came on Wednesday. I was in my hotel suite when my phone lit up with alerts, articles, texts, chaos. Olivia had filed for divorce from Patrick, and she had evidence. Not just infidelity, but fraud, hidden accounts, and emails detailing how Patrick planned to remove her with his lawyer's help. Ryan called 17 times in an hour. I answered on the 18th. "What did you tell her?" he demanded immediately. "Tell who?" "Olivia. Patrick says you two were friendly. He thinks you leaked everything." I told her nothing, I said truthfully. Olivia had uncovered her own truth. We were soldiers fighting parallel wars, never realizing how close our battles ran. Through the line, I heard something crash in his office. "He's pulling out of the fund," Ryan growled. 20 years of partnership, gone. He says I betrayed him for a woman. His laugh turned bitter. I wasn't even interested in Olivia. She's too old, too cautious. I was just keeping options open. The words should have hurt. They didn't. I simply noted the confession for Lisa's records later. Then came Nathan's voice screaming in the background. "Congratulations," Ryan shouted. "You've destroyed us both." The call ended abruptly. He didn't call back. But an hour later, Ruth texted, "Edward called an emergency meeting. All partners. The empire is cracking." I stared at the words for a full minute, the phrase glowing like a prophecy. My hands moved without thought, pulling the red wig from my closet, a cheap one I'd bought 3 weeks earlier from a shop in the Aurora suburbs that didn't ask questions. The dress was simple polyester, off the rack at Target, something no one in the Thorn circle would ever wear. Dark sunglasses completed the disguise. I looked like anyone, which was exactly the point. Nathan's office building downtown had security designed to impress, not protect. I'd been there dozens of times as Ryan's wife, I knew every blind spot. The guards switched shifts at 12:30. His assistant, Sarah, always took a 45-minute sushi break 3 blocks away. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt endless. In my bag was a manila envelope containing printed screenshots, every message Ryan had ever sent about Patrick. The mockery, the deceit, the plans to steal his clients once the partnership fell apart. But the last pages were the most poisonous. Ryan's financial projections for acquiring Olivia after her divorce, complete with calculations of her inheritance and instructions on how to access it through marriage. Nathan's door was heavy mahogany with his name carved in gold. I slipped the envelope underneath, heard it glide across the carpet, then turned and walked calmly back to the elevator. The cameras would record only a woman in cheap clothes walking with purpose, nothing more. 3 hours later, Ruth forwarded me an email from Ryan's assistant. Partnership dissolution letter received from Patrick Hale. Effective immediately. Legal team calling emergency meeting. The Mayfair Hotel on 54th Street still accepted cash if you had enough. I checked in under my maiden name, Emma Lawson. It felt like armor, like I'd finally remembered who I was. The room was small but spotless, with a desk just big enough for my laptop and the burner phone Lisa had given me. The SEC whistleblower hotline picked up after 12 rings. First an automated system, all numbers and prompts, press 1 for this, 2 for that. Reporting crimes felt disturbingly like ordering takeout. Finally, a human voice answered. Securities and Exchange Commission, Enforcement Division. I need to report systematic insider trading at Thorn Capital Partners, I said, my voice steady. I have 5 years of evidence, timestamped trades tied to material non-public information. The agent, who introduced herself as Jennifer Liu, listened silently as I laid everything out, Edward's lunches with CEOs, followed by Ryan's perfectly timed trades, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the pattern even a child could follow. Why are you coming forward now, Mrs. Thorne? She asked finally. I looked out the window at Chicago's skyline, the towers built by men like Edward and Ryan. Because I finally understand that silence makes me complicit. And because they're preparing to destroy another woman the way they tried to destroy me. After the call, I copied Ruth's 40 years of documentation onto 3 separate drives. One went into a safety deposit box at Chase, one at Bank of America, and one in Lisa's office safe. The instructions were clear: if anything happened to me, release everything, to the FBI, the SEC, and the New York Times, simultaneously. That evening, Edward's black Mercedes pulled into the building's garage. From the window of my penthouse, I watched him get out, his face tight with a mix of anger and fear. He didn't bother greeting the doorman. He had his own key, the privilege of a father-in-law who owned 30% of his son's fund. Where are your books? Edward's voice echoed through the penthouse long before he reached Ryan's study. Dad, what? The books, Ryan. I made myself small in the kitchen, brewing coffee with deliberate normalcy while their voices rose and fell down the hallway. My phone rested against a vase on the console table, silently recording every word. Nathan's out, Ryan was saying. But we can manage. Nathan's out? Morrison's out. Chin pulled everything this morning. The FBI was at Chen's office asking about our trading patterns. That's impossible, Ryan protested. Everything we do is bulletproof. Edward snapped. Was bulletproof. Until someone started talking. His tone turned deadly quiet. You promised me the wives were handled. She is, Ryan insisted. Emma's too stupid to understand what she signs. She doesn't even know how to read a balance sheet. I walked in with the coffee tray, my expression blank. The devoted wife serving drinks while her husband and father-in-law discussed her like a liability. Both men looked up, Edward assessing, Ryan dismissive. Cream? I asked politely. Edward ignored me, turning back to his son. Find the leak. Fix it, or we're finished. They worked until 2 in the morning, papers covering Ryan's study like tarot cards laid out to predict their doom. The printer hummed constantly, followed by the shredder. I heard him calling lawyers who charged $2,000 an hour just to pick up the phone. By 3, Ryan had passed out in his chair, surrounded by the wreckage of his empire. His head lolled onto a stack of contracts, drool spreading across papers once worth millions. The great financial genius, reduced to an exhausted man who'd built his throne on the backs of women he underestimated. I moved through the penthouse one last time, not sentimental but efficient. My clothes stayed in the closet, let him explain why his wife had left everything behind. The jewelry remained in their boxes, blood diamonds and gilt gold, never truly mine. In my purse, my laptop, my real ID, and the account details for Silver Hawk Holdings, which now held exactly half of our liquid assets, legally withdrawn over the last several weeks. The keys went on the granite counter where this had all begun, house, car, safe, lined in a perfect row. Beside them, a single note written on my personal stationery, the expensive kind he'd bought to make me look like the perfect wife. Check your accounts. The doorman didn't question why Mrs. Thorne was leaving at 3 a.m. with only her purse. In this world, the rich could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. He'd probably seen stranger things. The October air hit my face as I stepped onto the street, cold, sharp, and cleansing. Behind me, 23 floors up, Ryan slept in his chair, unaware that his wife had just fired the first shot in a war he didn't yet know had started. In 6 hours, he'd wake to find his accounts empty and the FBI closing in. The Uber driver asked, "Where to?" and for the first time in 4 years, I gave an address that was entirely mine. He dropped me off at the Mayfair Hotel just as the sunrise painted Chicago's glass towers gold. I paid in cash, walked through the lobby without looking back, and took the elevator to the 12th floor. From the window, I had a perfect view of our building, his building. I ordered room service, eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Normalcy felt surreal. At 6:52, I opened my laptop and checked our joint accounts online. I knew the banks would notify him the moment they opened at 7. At exactly 7, I refreshed the page. The balances showed the automatic divisions Lisa had filed weeks ago, triggered by my official change of residence, $17 million redistributed under Illinois matrimonial law. Half of everything, just as the prenup he'd insisted on specified. The same document he believed protected him had instead secured my rights. My phone, face up on the tablecloth, lit up at 7:03. His wedding photo flashed on the screen, Ryan looking invincible. I let it ring. By 7:15, he'd called 9 times. I turned on the recorder and played the voicemails aloud to the empty room. "Emma, what's happening? The bank says there's an error with our accounts. This isn't funny. Call me back, we need to fix this before markets open. What did you do? What did you do? Please, whatever you think you're accomplishing, we can work this out. You don't understand the position you're putting me in. The margin calls are hitting, I can't cover them without those funds. You're destroying everything we built. And finally, broken, Emma, please, they're freezing everything. The FBI is here. Please answer." By noon, his voice had gone from commanding to desperate. The 47th call came as I finished my second cup of coffee. The number was unfamiliar, his lawyer. "Mrs. Thorne, this is James Collerman. Your husband has retained me to discuss the irregular movement of marital assets. We need to." I hung up and blocked the number. Then I called Lisa. "They're panicking," she said, laughter in her voice. "Everything we did is 100% legal. The funds were jointly owned, and you had full withdrawal rights. He can contest it, but it'll take months, and by then, he'll have far bigger problems." That evening, I was eating dinner in my room, a perfectly cooked piece of salmon I could actually taste now that my appetite had returned, when my phone buzzed with a breaking news alert. I turned on the television and flipped to CNN. The footage was poetic. Edward Thorne, the man who had built an empire on manipulation, being led out of his Lake Forest mansion in handcuffs. His silver hair disheveled, his $1,000 suit replaced by a wrinkled shirt. FBI agents carried boxes of evidence past flashing cameras, each box filled with Ruth's 40 years of careful documentation. Federal authorities have arrested hedge fund mogul Edward Thorne this morning, the reporter said, following a multi-year investigation into insider trading, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Sources confirm multiple whistleblowers provided critical evidence spanning 4 decades. My phone buzzed again, a text from Ruth. Just a single champagne bottle emoji. Ruth, who had never sent an emoji in her life, who had poured coffee for these men while secretly archiving their crimes, had finally seen justice arrive. 3 weeks passed in quiet satisfaction. I met with FBI agents, gave testimony, and watched the empire crumble in real time from my hotel room. Patrick fled to Switzerland. Graham Chin pled guilty, hoping for leniency. Other partners turned state's witnesses, racing to betray one another for reduced sentences. Then, on a Thursday evening, Ryan found me. I was sitting at the Langham Hotel bar, drinking champagne I'd bought myself, paid for with profits from the trades he used to mock as my little hobby. He looked like a ghost in an expensive suit, unshaven, hollow-eyed, his Tom Ford jacket rumpled like he'd slept in it. "You destroyed everything," he said, stepping too close, whiskey thick on his breath. At 6 p.m., I turned on my bar stool and met his bloodshot eyes. "I didn't destroy it," I said softly. "I revealed it." "We had a life," he said. "You had a life," I corrected. "I had a role in your performance." I took another sip of champagne, savoring the bubbles. "You once said I wouldn't survive a week without you," I told him. "Turns out, I never needed you at all." "It's been 21 days, I said quietly, "and you're the one who looks like he's drowning." Ryan reached for my wrist, but I pulled away before his fingers could touch me. "You don't understand what you've done," he said, voice raw. "My father's facing 20 years. The fund is gone. Everything is." "Everything," I interrupted, "is exactly what you built it to be. A house of cards." I just stopped holding my breath. His face twisted, fury replacing despair. He raised his voice, drawing looks from other guests at the bar. "You stupid." "Sir." The bartender, a woman about Ruth's age, stepped forward. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Do you know who I am?" Ryan demanded. "Someone disturbing our guests," she replied coolly. Within minutes, 2 security guards arrived, guiding him out with calm efficiency as he shouted about lawyers and lawsuits. The bartender returned, wiped the counter, and set a fresh flute of champagne in front of me. "On the house," she said. That was long overdue. 2 days later, Olivia and I testified on the same day, unplanned, but poetic. She looked stronger than I'd ever seen her, no longer the fragile woman from those suffocating dinner parties. We sat side by side in the courthouse hallway, not speaking, but understanding everything. Ruth's testimony came last and lasted 3 full days. She had brought proof for every story, every bribe, every threat, every woman they had destroyed. She told the jury about Grace's accident, Victoria's institutionalization, Lauren's forced bankruptcy. Her voice was steady, her details exact. She'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. "Why did you keep all of this?" the prosecutor asked. Ruth adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Edward, sitting at the defense table. "Because I knew that one day, someone would be brave enough to use it," she said. "Someone like Miss Lawson." The prosecutor frowned. "You mean Mrs. Thorne?" "No," Ruth said firmly. "I mean Miss Lawson. She took back her name. She took back everything." That night, Lisa called. The prosecutor says Ruth's evidence alone guarantees convictions. Edward's done for life. Ryan's facing 15 to 20. I stood by my hotel window, staring out at the city lights, those towers that would keep shining long after the Thorne Empire had turned to dust. The towers seemed smaller when I looked from Lisa's office a week later. Or maybe I was just seeing them differently. She slid the final divorce decree across the desk, a few sheets of paper that weighed nothing but changed everything. The judge signed it this morning, Lisa said, smiling. The house, 60% of remaining assets, and all your separate property remain yours. The courtroom had been packed 3 days earlier. Ryan sat beside his lawyer, wearing the same navy suit he'd worn to our wedding, though it now hung loosely on his thinner frame. Stress had stripped away the polish, leaving behind someone I barely recognized. His attorney, James Collarman, tried one last desperate argument. Your Honor, Mrs. Thorne benefited from these alleged crimes. She lived in luxury and enjoyed the proceeds. Lisa stood smoothly, opening her laptop. Your Honor, I'd like to play an audio file from Mr. Thorne's personal recorder, dated 14 months ago. Ryan's voice filled the room, arrogant, disdainful. She wouldn't understand a financial statement if I drew her pictures. That's the beauty of marrying someone decorative. Too stupid to ask complicated questions. Judge Catherine Chen, a woman who'd probably heard every version of this story, met Ryan's eyes. Mr. Thorne, it appears you were quite wrong about your wife's intelligence. Perhaps if you'd valued her mind instead of her silence, you would have been more careful with your crimes. Now, holding the decree, I signed my name, Emma Lawson, on every line Lisa indicated. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had long forgotten. The whistleblower reward should clear next week, Lisa said. Between yours and Ruth's, you'll have more than enough to start over. Ruth was waiting for me in the lobby, wearing a gray suit, the first time I'd ever seen her out of her housekeeper's uniform. We walked 2 blocks to the building that had once housed Thorne Capital Partners. The directory in the lobby still showed a blank space where their name had been. 3rd floor, Ruth said, pressing the elevator button. The landlord gave us a deal. Apparently, hosting a non-profit for abuse survivors is better PR than keeping an empty office. The space was small, for rooms that had once been a dental clinic, but the windows faced east, catching the morning light. There was poetry in building our future above Ryan's ruins. Aurora Foundation, Ruth read from the temporary sign we'd hung that morning. Rising from ashes. Our first client arrived that same afternoon, a nervous woman named Jennifer Liu, wife of a pharmaceutical executive who'd been falsifying clinical trial data. She clutched a folder like a life raft. My husband says I'm paranoid, she whispered. That I wouldn't understand the science anyway. Ruth leaned forward, her 40 years of experience sharpening her tone. Every document tells a story, Mrs. Liu, and we're going to help you write a new ending. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my mother called. I'm coming to visit, she said, her tone leaving no room for refusal. I need to see my daughter. I'd moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Evanston, smaller than the penthouse but filled with sunlight and air. The kitchen was tiny but functional. I was teaching myself to cook, not just reheat. Mom arrived with 1 suitcase and 1,000 unspoken questions. I met her at O'Hare, driving my used Honda Civic, reliable, invisible in traffic. You look different, she said as we sat in airport traffic. Younger. Lighter. That week, we didn't talk about Ryan, or the trial, or the money waiting in untouched accounts. We talked about the foundation, about Ruth's humor, about the women who came through our doors carrying secrets like stones. I cooked Thanksgiving dinner, turkey a little dry, stuffing perfect, cranberry sauce from a can. Some traditions deserve to be kept. Mom watched me move comfortably through my small kitchen. You're happy, she said, not a question, but a realization. I'm free, I corrected. Then smiled. Maybe that's the same thing. She stayed an extra week, sleeping in the guest room I'd painted sage green, reading while I worked on case files. On her last night, she hugged me tightly, the way she had when I was little, before I learned to perform happiness instead of feel it. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Not for surviving him, but for becoming you." 6 months had passed since I walked out of that penthouse. Spring had come to Evanston. I stood in the doorway of what was now legally my house, though I'd only returned to sign the last of the papers. The rooms echoed with absence, Ryan's things long gone, removed by movers hired by his mother. My phone rang. It was Ruth, her voice alive with purpose. "We have a new client," she said. "Senator Collins's wife. She's been documenting campaign finance violations for the past 2 years." I looked at the keys in my hand, the ones I'd left behind, the ones I'd reclaimed, the ones I'd earned. They felt heavier now, not with vengeance but with meaning. Outside, I spotted Madison Reed walking down the street with her fiancé, not Ryan, not any Thorn man, but someone her own age who held her hand like it mattered. "Ready for round 2?" Ruth asked. I thought about the 17 women we'd already helped. 4 had walked away free, 13 were still gathering courage and evidence. "Always," I said. "Let's begin." Each woman who came through our doors was learning the same lesson I had, that freedom isn't something handed to you. It's something you take, one signature, one document, one act of defiance at a time. I was born ready, I told Ruth, closing the door on the now empty house. I just didn't know it until someone tried to convince me I was nothing. The lock clicked shut with a satisfying finality. I walked to my Honda, tossing the keys to the realtor who would sell this monument to Ryan's ego. The proceeds would keep the Aurora Foundation running for another year, maybe 2. As I drove back to Evanston, back to my smaller, warmer life, I thought about Grace, Victoria, and Lauren, the ghosts of wives past who had walked this same road before me. They had been broken, silenced, or erased. But their stories, preserved in Ruth's careful archives, had saved me. And now Ruth and I were saving others, one woman at a time, one step at a time, building a bridge out of the ashes of the empire we had burned to the ground. My phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. "Coffee tomorrow? I have someone you should meet. She needs our help." I smiled, merging into traffic, heading home, my real home. Not a gilded cage guarded by a doorman, not a marble penthouse filled with silence. This life, this freedom, it looked exactly the way I had always imagined it would. Simple. Quiet. Completely mine. If this story of calculated revenge had you cheering for Emma, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she lined up those keys on the granite counter and walked away without looking back. What was your favorite moment? Tell us in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories like this one. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload.